The rain was coming down hard, tapping on the window of Elliot Donovan's shiny black car as he stopped at a red light. The streets were almost empty, except for a few people rushing by with umbrellas. Elliot had just finished a long, tiring day at his real estate company, which he worked hard to build. All he wanted was to go home to his quiet apartment. But then, he saw something out of the corner of his eye that made him stop. By the crosswalk stood a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was completely soaked, with her hair sticking to her face. She was holding a baby tightly to her chest, and her face was wet with tears. Elliot blinked twice, thinking he might be seeing things, but when he looked again, the girl was still there. She was crying, and something didn't feel right. The light turned green, and the cars around him started moving, but Elliot couldn't move. He pulled his car over and rolled down the window, even though the cold rain soaked his arm. "Hey," Elliot called gently. "Are you okay? Where's your family?" The girl looked up, surprised. She had big blue eyes, and for a moment, she didn't move, like she was too scared to talk to him. Then, slowly, she took a step back, holding the baby closer. Elliot felt sorry for her. He didn't have kids and didn't want any, but the way this little girl stood there, so alone, made him think of his past. "You're going to catch a cold out here," Elliot said softly. "I can help you." "Please, where's your family?" The girl looked down at the baby and then back at Elliot. She didn't answer right away, but seemed to think about it. Then, she stepped closer, her feet splashing in the puddles, shivering as she moved toward the car. Elliot could see the baby now, a boy, maybe about a year old, sleeping in her arms. "Do you have anywhere to go?" Elliot asked, trying to stay calm, even though he was really worried. "Will a child be out in the rain like this?" The girl shook her head. "I don't know where my mom is," she said quietly. Elliot sighed. There was no one coming for them. "All right," he said, "get in the car. I'll take you somewhere safe." The girl hesitated, then nodded. She slid into the back seat, still holding the baby close to her chest. Elliot started driving again, his mind racing. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, watching as she wiped her tears away and tried to calm the baby. She was just a child herself, and the way she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders made him feel bad. "What's your name?" Elliot asked, trying to make her feel more comfortable. "Chloe," she whispered. "Where's your mom?" Elliot asked, feeling a mix of confusion and concern. "I don't know," she said softly. "She didn't come back." "How long has she been gone?" Elliot asked, trying not to sound too upset. "A few days," Chloe said. "She left and said she'd be back soon, but she never came." Elliot felt his heart ache. "Do you have anyone else? An aunt or a grandparent?" he asked. "No," Chloe said, shaking her head. "It's just me and Max now." Elliot felt a lump in his throat. This little girl and her baby brother had no one. He had grown up in a tough place too, without a family to rely on, but he had made it out. He couldn't let these kids be alone like that. "All right," Elliot said, trying to sound calm. "You're both coming home with me tonight. We'll figure things out in the morning." Chloe didn't argue. She was too tired to say anything else. When they reached his apartment, Elliot parked in the garage. He led her into the building, not explaining anything to the doorman. Chloe was quiet, looking around at the fancy elevator and shiny walls. This was the nicest place she had probably ever been. Once inside the apartment, Elliot offered her a towel. "You must be freezing," he said. Chloe nodded, wrapping the towel around herself. She didn't say much, but Elliot could see how tired she was. Elliot went to the kitchen and found some crackers and peanut butter. He didn't have much, but it was something. When he brought the food to her, Chloe looked at it and then at him, her face still worried. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking a cracker and feeding it to Max. "You're welcome," Elliot said, sitting back down. He wanted to help more, but he didn't know how. He kept thinking about Chloe and Max. Where had their mother gone? Why were they out in the rain? After a while, Chloe spoke again, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go to foster care," she said. "I don't want to be taken away from Max. Please don't let them take us." Elliot felt a knot in his stomach. He had to promise her. "I won't let that happen," he said, his voice firm. "You and Max will stay together. We'll figure this out." Chloe didn't say much more. She just nodded, looking down at Max in her arms. Elliot didn't know how he was going to keep that promise, but he would try. As the night passed, Chloe fell asleep on the couch, holding Max close. Elliot covered her with a blanket, but he stayed awake, feeling responsible for these two kids who had nowhere else to go. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the big windows, but Elliot still felt unsettled. Chloe and Max were still there, but now the reality of what he had gotten into hit him. He wasn't just helping two kids for the night. He was getting involved in something bigger, something he didn't fully understand. But for now, all he could do was make sure they were safe. Elliot needed answers, not just for Chloe and Max, but for himself too. He couldn't let them stay here forever, no matter how much he wanted to keep them safe. There were things he needed to know. He went back to the living room and gently woke Chloe up. She slowly blinked her eyes and looked at him. "Good morning," Elliot said, giving her a small smile. "I made some breakfast." Chloe nodded sleepily, sitting up and stretching without waking Max. "Thanks," she said quietly, rubbing her eyes. "I thought maybe we could talk," Elliot said, trying to sound relaxed even though he felt nervous. "I need to know more about what happened." "About your mom?" Chloe's face changed right away. She looked down at the floor, her face sad. She bit her lip and was quiet for a moment. Elliot thought she might not want to talk, but then she did. "She didn't come back," Chloe said in a small voice. "She's been gone for a while." Elliot asked, "How long?" Chloe hesitated and pulled the blanket tighter around her. "For days," she said softly. "She went to get something, but didn't tell me where. She didn't take her phone, so I couldn't call her." Elliot felt a tight knot in his stomach. 4 days. These kids had been alone all that time with no idea if their mom was coming back. He was angry at the mom for leaving, and at the system that might have failed them before Elliot even found them. "Do you know where she went?" Elliot asked gently. Chloe shook her head. Sometimes she'd leave for a few hours, but she'd always come back. "But she hasn't been doing so good," she said, her voice getting softer. Elliot leaned forward, feeling worried. "What do you mean?" he asked. Chloe looked down at her hands. She was twisting the blanket around her fingers. "She's sick," Chloe whispered. "She used to be better, but after Max was born, she got worse. She didn't take care of Max much. I had to." Elliot felt his chest tighten. He had seen this before. He knew the sickness she was talking about. It was an addiction. He had seen families fall apart because of it. "Chloe," Elliot said carefully, "I want to help you, but I need to know everything. Did your mom use drugs?" Chloe's face looked sad, and she nodded slowly. "She tried to stop," she said quietly. "But after Max was born, it got worse. She'd disappear sometimes. I had to take care of him." Her voice shook with sadness. She said she was trying, but it was hard. Elliot rubbed his face, feeling the weight of what Chloe was saying. He wasn't sure how to help, but he had to. "What about your dad?" Elliot asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear it. Chloe shook her head. "He's gone. He left before Max was born. I don't know where he is." Elliot let out a deep breath. No dad, a mom struggling with addiction, 2 kids alone. Things were much worse than he thought. He reached out and rested his hand on the armrest of Chloe's chair, trying to make her feel safe. "Chloe, listen to me," Elliot said softly. "I'm going to help you and Max. But I need to know, do you think your mom is coming back? Or do you think something has happened to her?" Chloe wiped her eyes quickly. "I don't know," she whispered. "She always came back before, but now, I'm scared." Elliot felt a pang in his chest, hearing the fear in her voice. He knew what it was like to wait for someone who never came back. He couldn't let that happen to Chloe. "We're going to find her," Elliot promised. "I'll make some calls and we'll find her, okay?" Chloe looked up at him, her eyes filled with both hope and doubt. "You'll really try to find her?" she asked quietly. "I will," Elliot said firmly. "But until then, you and Max are staying here with me. You don't have to worry about anything." Chloe nodded, but the fear was still there. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Elliot stood up and ran a hand through his hair. He had to figure out what happened to Isabella Connor, Chloe's mom. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't turn back now. As he drove down the dark highway, his mind raced. The motel was 20 minutes outside the city, far from the safe places he was used to. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the only light came from his headlights. Room 212. The number burned in his mind. He pulled into the gravel lot of the motel, the building crumbling in front of him. It was the kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be found. He parked near the back and sat for a moment, his heart pounding. Room 212 was on the second floor, at the far end. A single light flickered outside the door. This was it. Elliot stepped out of the car and walked toward the stairs. His boots crunched on the gravel with each step. Every part of him screamed to turn around, to walk away before things got worse. But he couldn't. Not now. He climbed the stairs, his pulse quickening as he got closer to the door. Room 212. The number was barely visible. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked. There was silence. He knocked harder this time. "Isabella," he called out. "Isabella Connors, it's Elliot Donovan. I'm here to help." Still nothing. Elliot's heart raced as he reached for the doorknob. He twisted it, half expecting it to be locked, but it creaked open. Inside, the room was dark, the only light coming from a TV flickering in the corner. The air smelled of cigarettes and something sour. Elliot stepped inside cautiously, scanning the room, and then he saw her. Isabella was lying on the bed, barely moving. Her face was pale and sickly. Empty bottles and syringes were scattered around her, and her clothes were dirty and stained. She looked nothing like the woman he remembered. She looked like a ghost. "Isabella," Elliot said, his voice tight with emotion as he knelt beside her. "Isabella, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, but they were empty, staring through him instead of at him. "Isabella, it's Elliot," he said softly. "Chloe sent me. We need to get you out of here." When Isabella heard Chloe's name, her eyes focused for a moment, and she tried to speak. "Chloe," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely audible. "Chloe's waiting for you," Elliot said gently. "We need to get you out of here. You're not safe." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head weakly. She tried to reach for something beside her on the bed. I can't go back." "Yes, you can," Elliot said. He gripped her hand tightly. "Chloe and Max need you. You can't leave them alone." But Isabella just shook her head again, gasping for breath. "I've failed them," she said. "I can't fix this. I can't." Elliot could see the guilt in her eyes, the way she believed she was too broken to fix. But he didn't believe that. He didn't believe it for her. "You haven't failed them yet," Elliot said firmly. "You're still here. You're still their mother. That's what matters. We can get through this together. But you have to fight, Isabella. For them." Isabella looked at him, her face full of fear and hopelessness. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of her mistakes was too much to carry. "I don't deserve them," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Not after what I've done." Elliot shook his head. "They don't care about what you've done. They care about you. Chloe doesn't want anything but her mom back. That's all that matters." Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks as she turned away, shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to leave them." Elliot's heart ached as he watched her break down. He wanted to fix everything, to make it all better. But he knew this wasn't something that could be fixed with just words. "We'll get through this," he said softly. "But you need to come with me. Right now." Isabella looked at him, her face full of fear and doubt. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then slowly, she nodded. Elliot helped her to her feet, his heart racing with both relief and fear. This was just the beginning. There was so much more to face. But for now, he had found her, and that was the first step. Together, they walked out of the motel into the cool night air. Elliot glanced at Isabella as she slumped in the passenger seat. The motel was behind them, but the smell of it, the desperation, lingered in the car. Isabella hadn't said much, and Elliot could feel the heaviness of her silence. It felt like it was pressing down on him. The night seemed endless as the highway stretched ahead of them. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. Getting Isabella out of that motel was only the first step. What came next? Rehab? Medical help? How would Chloe react when she saw her mom like this? What if Isabella couldn't pull herself together? "Chloe's been asking for you," Elliot said softly, trying to break the silence. "She's been taking care of Max, waiting for you to come back." Isabella blinked, her fingers twitching, but she didn't say anything. "You can still make this right," Elliot said. "You can still be there for them." Isabella let out a shaky breath, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I don't know if I can do it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I lost myself so long ago. I don't know how to be a mother." Elliot felt a pang of empathy. He understood that kind of pain, the feeling of being lost. He had seen it in his own family, in the faces of people he had tried to forget. You don't have to be perfect, Elliot said gently. Chloe doesn't need you to have all the answers. She just needs you to show up. That's enough. Isabella's eyes filled with tears again, and her breath was shaky. I've hurt them. I left them. What kind of mother does that? She said. Elliot gripped the steering wheel, his chest tight. One who made mistakes, he said, his voice rough. But mistakes don't define who you are. What you do next is what matters. For a moment, Isabella didn't answer. She kept looking out the window, and Elliot could see that she was struggling inside. She felt guilty, ashamed, and scared of facing her children after everything she had done. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. Do you think they can forgive me? Elliot swallowed, feeling his heart ache for her. I think they already have, he said quietly. Chloe has been hoping for you to come back. She just wants you home. Isabella's shoulders slumped like the weight of her guilt was too much. She covered her face with her hands and cried softly. Elliot didn't know what to do. He could bring her to the door, but the rest was up to her. When they pulled into the garage, the night was cold and quiet. Isabella wiped her eyes, trying to pull herself together as they got out of the car. She looked fragile, like a strong wind could knock her down, but there was a small spark of determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. As they rode the elevator up, Elliot could feel the tension. Chloe was waiting a few floors above, and he didn't know what would happen when they saw each other. He hoped it would be the start of something better, but deep down, he worried it might be too late. The elevator doors opened, and Elliot led Isabella down the hallway to his apartment door. Before they reached it, Isabella stopped and grabbed his arm. Her hand shook as she said, Elliot, what if I can't do this? What if I fail them again? Elliot turned to her, his face serious but kind. You're here now. That's what matters. The only way you fail is if you don't try. Isabella nodded, but her eyes were still filled with uncertainty. She took a deep breath and let go of his arm, walking forward. Elliot unlocked the door and opened it. The warmth of the apartment filled the air. Inside, the room was softly lit by a lamp, casting shadows across the walls. Chloe was curled up on the couch, holding Max, who was fast asleep in her lap. When she heard the door, Chloe looked up. Her eyes widened when she saw Elliot, but then she looked at Isabella. Mom, she whispered, her voice full of emotion, hope, fear, and disbelief. Isabella froze in the doorway. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw her daughter. Tears filled her eyes as she took a shaky step forward. Chloe, she whispered. Chloe gently placed Max down on the couch, standing up slowly. She moved toward Isabella, her small body trembling. Neither of them spoke at first. They just stared at each other, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then, without warning, Chloe threw herself into Isabella's arms, hugging her tightly, like she was afraid she might disappear again. Mom, she cried, her voice breaking. You're back. You're really back. Isabella's arms wrapped around her daughter, holding her close. She sobbed into Chloe's hair. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Chloe. I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted to hurt you. Chloe shook her head, hugging Isabella tighter. I don't care, she said. I just want you here. I just want you to stay. Elliot stood back and watched, his heart heavy. He could see the pain in both of them, the scars from the time they had been apart. But he also saw the love between them, the desperate need to hold on to each other. Max stirred on the couch, making a soft noise as he woke up. Isabella pulled back from Chloe and wiped her tears. She looked at Max and moved to him, kneeling beside the couch. Max, she whispered softly, I'm here, baby. I'm here. The baby blinked up at her, sleepy and confused. But as Isabella lifted him in her arms, the room seemed to calm. For the first time in a long time, they were together. Elliot leaned against the door frame, letting out a shaky breath. It wasn't over yet. There were still hard times ahead, still things to heal, but tonight, this was enough. He quietly left, giving them the space they needed. But Isabella's voice stopped him. Elliot, she said. He turned back and saw the tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, her voice full of emotion. I don't know how to repay you for what you've done. Elliot shook his head, a tired smile on his face. "You don't have to repay me," he said softly. "Just take care of them. That's all that matters." Isabella nodded, holding her children tightly. "I will. I promise." Elliot closed the door quietly behind him, feeling the weight of the past few days lift a little. He had done what he set out to do, but the road ahead for Isabella, Chloe, and Max was up to them now. He could only hope they would find their way back to each other. But for tonight, they had a chance. Elliot stood outside for a moment after the door closed, trying to process everything that had happened. He had found Isabella and brought her back, but now he wondered if she could really stay strong and rebuild her life. He wanted to believe the love he saw in her eyes when she held Chloe and Max was enough, but he knew it wasn't always that simple. He needed a moment to think. He had done his part. Now it was Isabella's turn to follow through. Later that night, Elliot sat in his living room, staring out the window at the city lights. The streets of Los Angeles were alive with energy, but inside, it was quiet. He thought about his own past, his childhood, which hadn't been very different from Chloe's. His mother lost to her struggles, his father never around. He had made it out, but not without scars. For years, he had convinced himself that he didn't need anyone, that the walls around his heart were strong enough. But now, with Chloe, Max, and Isabella in his life, those walls were starting to come down. He hadn't wanted to get too close, but now he couldn't imagine leaving. Just then, he heard soft footsteps. He turned to see Chloe standing in the doorway. She looked small and fragile in the oversized sweatshirt he had given her to sleep in. "Hey," Elliot said gently. "What are you doing up? It's late." Chloe hesitated and then walked over to him, her eyes filled with worry. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. I wanted to make sure you were still here." Elliot's heart tightened. He hadn't realized how much Chloe feared being abandoned. But now he saw it in the way she sat so close to him, her hands trembling. "I'm here," Elliot said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Chloe nodded, looking down at her lap. "Is my mom going to be okay?" she asked quietly. Elliot thought for a moment before answering. "She's going to try," he said, "and that's a good start. But it won't be easy. She's going to need a lot of help from you. And from me. But the important thing is that she's here. She's back with you." Chloe looked up at him, her eyes full of both hope and fear. "Do you think she'll stay this time?" Elliot wished he could promise her, but he knew it wasn't that simple. He had seen people like Isabella before, people who wanted to change but were trapped by their past. "I hope so," he said, "but no matter what happens, you're not alone. I'll be here. I'll help you and Max however I can." Chloe wiped her eyes and nodded. She shifted closer to him, resting her head on his shoulder. Elliot felt a rush of protectiveness for her. This little girl, who had been through so much, was now looking to him for comfort. He wrapped an arm around her and held her close. "You've been really brave, Chloe," he said softly. "Braver than most people I know." Chloe sniffled, her voice small but steady. "I just want my family to stay together. That's all I want." Elliot's chest tightened. "I know," he said, "and we'll do everything we can to make that happen." They sat in silence for a few more moments, the city's hum outside the only sound. Elliot felt Chloe's body relax as she started to drift off to sleep. He carefully lifted her into his arms and carried her to the guest room, where Max was already asleep in his crib. He gently laid her on the bed, tucking her in. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her sleep, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He wasn't sure how he had become part of their story, but now that he was, he couldn't imagine walking away. He quietly left the room, leaving the door cracked open, and went back to the living room. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, and he saw a message from the rehab center he had called. They had a bed available for Isabella, and were ready to take her in as soon as possible. It was the first step toward a better future, but it wouldn't be easy. Isabella had a long road ahead, and Elliot knew the fight wasn't over. But at least now, she had a chance. He sank back onto the couch, exhaustion settling over him. He had done all he could, and now it was up to Isabella. For the first time in years, he let himself feel hope, not just for Chloe and Max, but for Isabella too. Maybe, just maybe, they could all find their way back from the edge. As he closed his eyes, the image of Chloe's hopeful face stayed with him. No matter what happened next, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. They were all in this together, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more content like it, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our latest, inspiring, and heartwarming stories, and have the opportunity to engage with our growing community. Additionally, I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comment section below. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to sharing more captivating narratives with you.